Welcome to the Very Occasional Podcast with Morgan Quaid. I'm joined today by Amy Lawrence, award-winning fantasy author and creative genius. Amy, thanks for joining us on the Very Occasional Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Morgan. I really appreciate it.
I throw the creative genius in there because why not? Why not?
Look, if it's a label you're going to be happy to apply to me, I'm happy to accept it. Not going to say that.
I'm fairly liberal with splashing that one at myself, so why not? Why not a guest?
That's fair.
All right, well, it's great, first of all, to be chatting to another fellow Australian. That's really cool because we're on the same time, more or less. And it's
how much easier does it make it for things like this? It's so good.
It's fantastic. We're both awake. We're alert. There's no massive time difference. So look, you're fairly prolific as a writer, and there's a few things I really want to dig into. But let's start with the novels and fantasy genre and the novellas. Where did that journey start for you?
Gosh, I mean, how long do you have? Because technically, I think I was probably born that way.
Right.
Yeah, no, like it literally wasn't until I became a high school English teacher myself that I realized that it was like not actually typical to be pulled out of your primary school classroom to go and sit in a little office with a separate teacher, basically almost entirely so you could write stories while the other kids were doing whatever boring classwork it was that they were doing. So yeah, when I say from birth, I'm probably not exaggerating too much. My very first story was a fantasy mashup of Narnia and two dogs called Danny and William, who were the stars of one of my favorite picture books in the school library. So that's where it started,
Wow.
From there, in high school, I was blessed to have a really good friend who was also really into fantasy. She's actually the one that I attribute with introducing me to the fantasy genre when she handed me Moving Pictures by Terry Pratchett in year 8, when previously I'd almost exclusively been reading The Saddle Club. I still have lots and lots of Saddle Club novels somewhere in the house in a box.
So hang on. Is that Saddle Club, as in a horse?
Saddle Club,
right.
as in horses. Yes.
Right. Okay. I gotcha. I missed the first bit enough. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, and this friend who had introduced me to, the wonders of the fantasy genre was really into writing and that side of creativity as well. And so we actually came up with a shared world that we worked on for many years during high school. Never actually ended up progressing to the writing stage, alack, but I feel like that was an important lesson right there. And then in university, I took a couple of creative writing classes, realized that I probably didn't want to do anything to do with law for the rest of my life, which had been my major up to that point, and decided that English teaching would be a really nice way to have time to raise a family and write books. It's okay. The teachers in the audience can finish laughing in a minute, because instead what happened is teaching almost entirely burned me out, because I love it with all my heart, but it is heart consuming. And so recently I left teaching nearly 12 months ago now to go and become, I live in Canberra, so what else am I going to be? I'm a public servant. And, adopt a little bit more of a lifestyle that's a bit more supportive to both family and writing.
And did you find, I hear you, I've done the stint in teaching, but I never quite made it to my first prac, and then thought, this is amazing, I can't do this, and then sort of bailed before I went to that next step. Do you find that one of the pressures or difficulties to deal with that was, in your day job you were dealing with quite creative things, and then now I've got to get home and write, and I'm dealing with creative. Do you find it easier in a job that's not so creative?
Yes, absolutely. Because you're using a very different skill set now, and I'm using a lot more of the analytical sort of brain. And so when I come home, or even during lunch breaks now, I feel that my brain is really fresh enough to be able to engage with that creativity. Whereas teaching, as you say, it's problem solving and it's logic brain, but it's also creativity and responding to the situation. And it's very personal and very relational. And for me, I don't know, that personal relational type part of my brain is really adjacent to where my storytelling comes from. And so I almost felt like just having all of that people contact and being so involved with their real life stories, took away from the energy that I had left over then to actually invest in my fiction at the same time. So, yeah. And just the amount of hours that you have to work, you know, all of the after hours work, homework every night and every weekend, and just, yeah.
Yep, I hear you. I definitely hear you. So tell us about your let's say the first novel or the first writing project. What was your process to get from nothing to I have a complete book?
So I knew very much, and I'm going to talk about my first unpublished book because I think that that's a really interesting process to talk about, particularly for, I know that a lot of new writers, this will be a very familiar situation, right? So up until that point, I had done all of the world building with my friend throughout high school and early uni, as I mentioned. I'd done a couple of creative writing classes at university, which were mostly scenes and snippets, because you only had a certain amount of word count that you could submit every week, right? And so there was never actually any pressure to complete the entire novel if that's what you were working on, right? And so I left university, or it was in my late years of university that I discovered a website called Critique Circle, which is basically what it sounds like. There are queues available. You post your work for feedback. You can, if you want to, sign up and pay to have your own private queue as well, which is what I ended up doing, and attracted a circle of friends who we were able to like mutually give feedback on each other's work. And while I was there was one person who was particularly prolific, who was very into short stories and is a very talented short story writer. And I believe that they've gone on to win some short story awards as well. Unfortunately, I can't remember the surname that they currently write under, so I can push you to them. But anyway, I'm very grateful to them because they took a bunch of us under their wing and developed a little queue where a bunch of us were trying to practice writing short stories and actually writing a complete short story. So on the one hand, we had that going on. Then I approached my very first November as a member of Critique Circle. And for those of you who've been in the writing world for a little while, you might be familiar with the significance of November because it is NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month. And I was like, oh, this is the kind of challenge that I need. This is the kind of deadline that I need to push me through, to force me to finish an actual novel, particularly because the point is the finishing and the word count. The point is not how good the novel is. And I struggled a lot and still do at times with perfectionism. And so I felt like that would be a really good way to get myself through that first novel. The only problem was I had no idea how to plot a novel still. I'm like, I can watch a story and I can tell you what's happening and I can predict what's going to happen and I can analyze it. But in terms of translating that into how I plot my own middle of my novel, I just, for some reason, the dots were just not connecting in my head, right? So what I did was I got this excellent short story writer friend of mine and I got them to literally write me a chapter by chapter outline. I was like, here's my pitch. This is the kind of thing I want to write. It's going to be silly. It's going to be fun. It's going to be wild. I'm just going to pack as much random stuff in there as I can to get me through with fun. Yeah. Please tell me what happens in each chapter. And so they did. They wrote me this lovely, 50 chapter outline so that I had to write one per day or one per 1,000 words, I beg your pardon, to get through. And I did. And the novel wasn't finished by the time I got to the end of the outline. So I kept writing in December and I finished it and I realized that I'd written book 2 of a series. So yeah, that was a process. So then I had to actually go through the process of learning how to do it myself without the training wheels on, so to speak. But I did really value that process of having that, the training wheels really firmly on there to actually get me through that middle and to start training my brain what it felt like to get through that murky middle of a novel, where just can feel really long. The middle of a novel can feel really long.
Oh, I hear you.
Yeah.
The middle. I'm in the middle of a novel and a screenplay at the moment myself, and right in that point, and I hate it. I hate it so much. If you can just give me the start and the finish,
yeah,
great. I do not want to deal with the middle, exactly. But you kind of have to. That's really interesting. Though it's a really good. It's actually a genius way of writing your first novel, having someone help with the outlining component, because you're filling in the blanks then, but you're still learning and you're developing and all the rest of it.
There's I found it was the perfect balance of enough structure so that I could get myself through those chapters with enough flexibility still then that I was free to come up with spontaneous ideas and characterize and world build and things like that as I went along. So yeah, it was really fun. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. So my advice to new writers is absolutely have an outline, exactly like you said. if it's chapter by chapter, great, or just key plot point by key plot point, and then work through it. And so don't freewheel it. Don't, go by the seat of your pants. But I never do that myself. So it's funny. It's like, for your first one, do this, but later on you might realize that, hey, I don't need this training wheels anymore, or I do it slightly differently.
I think that so far, literally every single one of my novels has been written using a different process, which is really interesting to me. Yeah, because
so does that mean?
Sorry, yeah.
Well, I was going to say, so does that mean that you haven't landed on the one where you think, this is it, this is now how I'm going to write, or is it more the explorer in you that just, I want to try different ways of approaching this?
It's almost like the personality of the novel dictates how I'm going to have to write it. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
yeah,
some of them, and I think a lot of it comes back to what the novel looks and feels like in my head before I set out writing it. There's some of them where I'm like, no, I actually really need to know blow by blow exactly what's going to happen here, because the plot that's going on, I can't quite actually like contain it in my head to see what's going to happen, and I feel like I need to know that. Other ones I've written where I'm like, particularly the third book in my Sanctuary series. Sorry, I'm pointing like this because that top shelf there is all of the Inkprint Press books, right? So if I do that gesture, that's what that's for. The third one in my Sanctuary series, I wrote almost entirely without an outline and almost entirely without any editing as well. But because it was the third book of a series, the foundations had been laid there. And so what I did for that one, which was so much fun, and I still have photos of it around somewhere, I reread the first two books with a notebook next to me. And I noted down every single time I had foreshadowed or promised something in the first two books. And then I went through a highlighter and went, okay, these are the ones that are absolutely compulsory. I have to wrap these up for the series to be satisfying. And then I had so that was the red ones. And then I had yellow of like, yeah, I probably should wrap this up. But also if I don't, I probably won't get cranky letters about it. And then the green was like, yeah, that was just a throwaway line, but also be really cool if I could build on that and do something with it, right? And then I literally just had all of those out on the table and was like, great, there's my options for every chapter. I know that I've got to hit the red ones. I got to try and get the yellow ones in. Let's go. Let's write. So yeah, totally different.
Wow. That is a great approach. And at book 5 in my current series, I'm thinking that would have been good to do at some stage. I mean, I have got a list of, the things that need to happen.
Yeah.
But I don't think I have the patience to go through the old books and
problem, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. I just don't think I have it in me to do that. And there's the fear as well. I don't know if you have this, but I have the fear of, I'm going to find something in there that I promised that I have not delivered on at all. And it's almost like, I just don't want to know. It's fine. I'll
just don't tell me about it. It's fine.
Yeah.
I really
it's magic.
Writers like Brandon Sanderson, who just like their world is so big now that they literally just rely on their fans to tell them. It's like, guys, I can't remember what happened with this, this, and this. Someone please tell me. Like, yes, can I have an external brain like that, please? That would be amazing.
that would be great. Yeah. But we struggle on. All right. So the fantasy genre, what is it about that genre that appeals to you as a writer?
Yeah, I mean, I've been asked this question so many times, often by my family, most of whom do not understand my interest in this genre. And I'm really yet to come up with an answer that I really feel hits on like, yes, that's the thing. That's what it is that drew me to fantasy. So I sort of circle around this ideas of like, well, first of all, it's having spent 13 years in an English classroom and looking at what students read and surveying them about what they read, there does tend to be a fairly significant correlation between neurodivergent kids and people who like sci-fi and fantasy. There's something about that different way of seeing the world that apparently just appeals to that different way of thinking, and that different way of processing the world as well. I really like the fact that you can work with metaphor and symbolism at that deeper level with fantasy and science fiction to some extent as well, that you can't necessarily do with contemporary writing. I love the genre aspect of it as well, is just really comfortable to me. And I'm really also hyper aware of the fact that I have unusually high empathy levels, which probably goes with the neurodivergence. And so reading contemporary particularly drama, is often just really stressful for me. I'm like, no, this is too real. Why do I want to watch real people fight? This is just like, no, I can't. This is stressful. So fantasy is actually a little bit safer, I guess, in that respect, in that it's like that one step removed. And it's possible to grapple then with all of these ideas of what it means to be human and what relationships look like and what humanity looks like and what, bigger issues as well about religion or discrimination or wealth equity or power imbalance, to grapple with all of these issues, but at one step slightly removed. And so it takes that emotion out of it a little bit, which I think is a lot of the power and the value of the fantasy genre, because you can then present different ideas to audiences where they might not necessarily be receptive to that idea in the real world, but in a fantasy world, as I said, the emotion's taken out of it. And so it's a little bit easier to then examine all of the different possibilities and the different options. So yeah, I like that aspect of it. Probably when I finally come up with a pithy answer to the question, it'll circle something around that.
Well, that I like it, and I particularly that last point about being able to deal with these intense and problematic issues with people and how we can be nasty to one another and everything. But that slight point of removal, that's a really, really good point. And also magic,
yes,
and creatures and stuff.
Dragons and unicorns and magical things and yes. And again, the metaphorical aspect of magic is so interesting to me as well, and how we can use and it's really interesting now at this point on the other side of burnout and doing a lot of really concerted work on myself right now in this healing process, which I still feel kind of, it's a phrase. Anyway, whatever. We're using the phrase. Yeah, it's really interesting going back and looking at all of my early writing that I was convinced is just, oh no, I'm just playing around with stories. And no, this is just magic. And this is just because it's fun and cool. And going, oh, baby Amy, that magic system you created there, that's literally a metaphor for exactly what you were going through in your life at that point in time. That's really cute that you couldn't see that,
Wow. Yeah. Well, because magic, however it's engaged, magic is power, or the use of power. And that's a really strong thing, depending on who's got it, who doesn't have it. And it can be an equalizer if you've got a group that are sort of downtrodden, but they can possess this same ability. Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, nothing is kind of inconsequential. Everything has sort of meaning. And so if you're you're quite prolific, you've written a lot in a lot of different areas. Do you have the issue with, we'll call it writer's block, but maybe idea block or whatever it is that the midpoint of a novel, let's say, and how do you get around that, or how do you push forward when you're sort of at a sticking point?
I'm really glad that you mentioned at the midpoint of the novel as well, because for me, I would definitely say that I never have writer's block or idea block. I very early on, back in high school, started keeping notebooks and just observing the things that I saw and would write down anything that I saw, and trained myself into the habit of asking questions. I remember one time the friend who'd got me into fantasy when we were both in university, we had a month, I think it was, where we called it observation month. And for each week, there was a different theme. And so week one, it was something like the kinds of shoes that different kinds of people wear. And then the different kinds of bags that different kinds of people carry, and just little things like that to start training ourselves to paying attention to the way that different people do things in the world. Because I think that's one of the most important skills that you need to develop as an early writer, is that real understanding that not everyone sees the world the same way that you do. And so any practice you can put into that is obviously going to be really valuable. And then on top of that, just asking questions as well. I remember really clearly, it was actually on my first teaching prac, and I was teaching creative writing. And on the way into the school that morning, I drove past an office block, and a group of people were coming out of the office block and locked it up behind them, and then went and got in their cars and drove off as though assumedly they were going home. And so just making that practice of asking questions, of going, well, that's really interesting. Why were they leaving first thing in the morning when you're expecting people to be arrived there? What reasons could I come up with to justify that? And so by sort of embedding that practice in my daily life of like, oh, I wonder why that person did that. What could motivate that? What could the meaning behind that be? I literally will need to live to be about 150 in order to get through all the ideas of stories I'm currently committed to in my brain. So if anyone has like some hot tips and tricks about how to achieve that, I am all ears.
Well, I tell you what, so my secret for that has been comics, because a comic is, 22 pages. You can write a story. They're basically short stories, but with, horrendously expensive artwork. So I wouldn't recommend it for everyone, but that's one way that I do it. But yeah, okay, so we're kindred spirits then. I'm exactly the same. I'm the world's best starter. There are no shortage of ideas. It's when it comes to the whole, you're 40,000 words in and you think, I know where I'm going. I've got to get to there, but I don't want to have to do all the words to get to that. Can't I just get there? I don't want to have to narrate things happening. Just, Oh, wow. That's very interesting.
Yeah. So the middle, like I said, I'm glad that you mentioned like the idea of writer's block in the middle of the novel, because I feel like that's a related but different beast, Yeah. And it's been an interesting process. Like the more novels I write, obviously, and the more I come up against that middle, and even with the novellas as well, the more I'm starting to understand that there's actually a couple of different reasons that happens. And I have to actually be able to stop and self-diagnose what's going on in order to be able to move forward accurately and effectively on the novel. Sometimes it happens. Often in the last 5 years, it's happened purely just actually because I'm exhausted and my creative brain has run out. I really love the metaphors that people use about your creativity being a well, and that you actually have to consciously put time and effort into filling that well in order to have things to draw out from the well. And when I was working full-time as a high school teacher, students would be like, oh, miss, have you seen so-and-so? I'm like, you just started a sentence with the words, have you seen? The answer is automatically no. And I just did not have time to read much or watch TV much or watch films or anything like that. And so there wasn't enough going into the creative well in order to be able to flow back out effectively. So it can just be that you're exhausted and you need, refilling. The other one that I found is the next most common one for me is that I've taken the story in the wrong direction somewhere. And that screeching to a halt in the middle is actually my subconscious screaming at me going, I've been shouting at you for the last 15,000 words that you were supposed to do something different. Why aren't you listening to me? You're not listening to me? Fine. No more ideas until you listen to me. Literally shelved the novel that I was working on last year because that happened. I got halfway through. It was really low. I think I'm at like 50,000 words out of a planned 85. So I'm even past halfway through. Bam, screeched to a halt. Took me a month of thinking, and I'm like, oh, I know the scene that went wrong, but it means undoing like 20,000 words of work. And so instead of doing that, I have a way to write a different novel in the meantime. So I'll get back to that, but just, and then the other one is sometimes the idea is just too thin and you haven't put enough into it, right? So often we get like this idea of like, oh, there's this really shiny thing and I really want to write this particular scene, or I really want to have this really exciting climax and conclusion in my story, but we didn't add legs to it. It's like we have the top of the table and we know it looks great, but we don't have the legs to hold the table up. And that's where it's like, I feel like, what you were saying of like, oh, do I really have to write all of the like stuff to get there? Can't I just get there? And the answer is, well, yeah, you can, because you just make it a short story and you just write the shiny bit, and that's totally fine. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you don't want to make it a shiny short story, then you have to add more shiny to the novel, right? And so you have to add in more points that make you excited along the way. The novella that I wrote, whatever year it was that I wrote it, but it's the one that won the Aurealis for Best Fantasy Novella last year. I got halfway through that novella. I had no idea where it was going. I was really exhausted, so that was an additional problem as well. I knew I hadn't gone wrong anywhere, so I could take that one off the table. And I went, what's a really good idea? I'm going to just run a Kickstarter for it, and that's going to give me a deadline to finish it, right? I ran the Kickstarter. Still had no idea what to do next with the book. I was like, okay, all right. I'm going to put it up for pre-order. Because that is a really hard and fixed deadline, and I'm going to have to get something done by then. I know it's only a novella. My novellas are about 10,000 words. So, you know, it's not like I'm asking too much of myself here. Yeah, like 2 weeks before the publication deadline, still had nothing. And how I ended up doing it was, we at Inkprint Press do these little things called fan kits, which I happen to have here next to me, fan kits. We do boxes for novels and then do little ones for novellas. And I was like, you know what? I know I'm going to do a fan kit for this because I ran the Kickstarter for it. So I need to find items to go into it. So I literally went online shopping and was like, what are some cool things that will fit into a fan kit in my budget that match the tone of the story? Got all of these cool shiny things and went, right, that's the plot that I have to write. I have to write to the bone fox. That's going to happen next. Then I have to write to the orca in the ocean scene. Then I have to write to this particular scene. Then I have to write to, and that's how the book unfolded. And if you're not building fan kits to go with your book and you don't want to go shopping for them, that's fine. You can do the same thing on Pinterest, which is now what I do for my other ones. It's like I get to the point, I'm stuck, and I literally go and start doing things like typing key phrases to do with the mood of the story into Pinterest and just seeing what images it spits back out. And so far, every time it's got to the point where it's like something will click and I'm like, oh yeah, that's really cool. I'd love to include that in this story. Oh, that's really cool. That could fit in this story too. And you just start building the shiny back in until all of a sudden critical mass of things that you're excited about again. And then you get the forward momentum going again, you know?
There's so much in there. You have literally described my process and what I've gone through in the last 4 or 5 days is exactly that. Putting more shiny back into the book because I'd run out essentially of gas, and then got to the point and thought, I can't see where to go from here. But it's exactly the same thing. So this novel I started last year, got to the halfway point, shelved it. Wrote an entirely new novel, finished that one because that was easy. That was different. It was the first novel in a series. I didn't even know if it's going to be a series. Super easy. So there's no pressure to, you just got to do a fun novel. That is a really, really good way of looking at it. So what would be your advice? Someone comes to you and they say, I want to write novels in whatever genre. What would be your sort of key advice to someone wanting to get into it?
Sure. Do as much reading and research as you possibly can. The internet makes that really easy to do for free these days. And deliberately look for 2 things. 1, authors who are breaking traditional advice, because it's really, really common in particularly writing articles pitched at new writers for the author to get quite didactic and be like, you must never do this in a novel, or you can only do this in novels. And that's not true, but you do have to know the rules before you can break them. But yeah, deliberately looking for the 2 sides to every story to figure out and weigh up whether that piece of advice is actually going to suit the way that you write or not. Most of it's going to, I think, but there's always going to be some that just doesn't work for you, and it just doesn't match how you write and how your brain conceives of stories or the kind of stories that you want to write or anything like that. So research and widely and look for opposing opinions. And the other advice, obviously, is to keep practicing, keep writing, because you can read, and I fell into this trap. I world built with my friend for years and years and years and never actually wrote fiction. And that is, it's not wasted time, but if you were looking at from that particular, from a productivity lens, that's wasted time in terms of I could have been practicing for all those years. Imagine how much further down the road I'd be now if I'd actually just been writing during that time. And there was a third piece of advice that I had that's just gone out of my brain, which I normally wouldn't say that, but I know that you're editing this, so that's okay.
I'm leaving it all in. I'll leave it. No.
That's okay too, right? Like it might not be writer's block, but it's advice block. What was I going to say? It was good too. Never mind. Like you can't do much worse than researching and practicing,
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny how I'm not sure if you had this issue, but I've never had the blank page issue. That's never been.
I get that when I'm in a certain headspace, when I know that I'm letting my perfectionism rule the roost too much. And I've actually developed a technique to help with that now that I was inspired to use from a Sydney writer called Amy McNee, who runs a collective as like a support group for creatives of all kinds, but she's a writer herself. And when I'm feeling like that and I'm feeling intimidated by the blank page, what I do is I have a separate, so I use Scrivener, and at the top, the very, very top of all of my folders and files in Scrivener is my scratch pad. And I will go there and I will literally pep talk myself into it and be like, Amy Lawrence, you literally won an award for your writing last year. You know that you have the ability to put together competent sentences. I know that we don't know what's happening in this scene. That's okay. That's really normal. We're going to figure it out as we go along. We just need to do 5 minutes of this. And I literally like use, first person plural like that to be like, we're going to do this. We're competent. We're capable. We can, and pep talk my way into it. Sometimes it only takes about 30 seconds of doing that. And I'm like, yeah, cool, I'm good to go. I can start this scene. Sometimes I have to do it for like 5 minutes and be like, just write my way into it. And be like, what else is distracting you? What are you really scared of here? Why are you procrastinating on this? Don't you think that maybe, there are some other things going on that you should be dealing with and not blaming it on you? So I have to like psychoanalyze my way into the blank page.
And the genius of that approach is while you're doing that, you're writing, which is the thing that you need to do to get moving anyway. That's a great approach. I'm going to adopt that one and start using it myself, I think.
Please do. Like I said, I was inspired to start doing that from Amy McNee. So it's not my technique, but man, I'm grateful for it. It's definitely working really well.
Fantastic. All right. Well, speaking of fantastic, we're going to move to the next section of the podcast, which is the worst pitch. The idea is we both come up with a pitch for a book or film or TV, which is the terriblest. I'm happy to go first because I have a plethora of truly terrible ideas at any given moment. But happy for you to go first, whichever you would be most comfortable with.
You can go first. That's all right. That'll give me a little bit more brainstorming time. It's really funny that coming up with a bad idea is equally as stressful as coming up with a good idea. You'd think it would not be like this.
It's fun. Usually what I'll do is I'll look in the background of both of our cameras and see, is there something there I could use? Is there? And unfortunately with mine, it's always like, oh, another one about a guitar or a string. I've done too many of those.
Yeah.
So this one is going to be, I'm just going to say it and invent it while I'm saying it because I don't actually have the idea. It's about a filing cabinet.
Nice.
But this filing cabinet has very special things in it. It has memories in it. Mm-hmm. So there's a kind of clerk type figure that works in a bureaucratic sort of business that looks after all of these memories. But the memories that are in these filing cabinets are all forgotten memories. So as soon as a human forgets a memory and it's irretrievable, it lands in this cabinet, or what they call the filing cabinet of all of these memories. And the story, though, focuses really clearly on this person that works there, a clerk, I don't know what they're called, records manager.
We know who you're talking about.
That person, and that, that whoever they are. And the whole thing is over a 2-hour period. Let's say it's a film, and it is them effectively trying to get into the door to the records room because they have forgotten the combination to the door to get into the records room, and it's in the records room now as a memory that's been lost, and that's it. There's no way that would be a film. I mean, maybe a short story, a little funny thing, but
that would be an amazing short story.
Yeah, it wasn't as bad as I'd hoped.
No, and I feel like, because I don't know if you listened to a podcast called Writing Excuses by Brandon Sanderson, started it up originally with Mary Robinette Cowell and a couple of other people. And they used to do something, it might be his actual podcast that he does now. Anyway, they do terrible story ideas as well. And the thing is, you find so often that like it starts out being terrible and it actually goes somewhere really cool. And I feel like, I don't know what you said. I think that makes a really interesting point about the whole concept of a terrible idea, is that there's not actually objectively something that is a terrible idea. There's something that's a terrible idea for the format. you know? Like
Yeah.
that story idea that you came up with would make an amazing short story and a terrible 2-hour film. But it's not like the
Yep.
idea itself that's inherently terrible, right?
And this is the problem, because as soon as the only idea I had to start off with was filing cabinet. And then the
Yeah.
problem is our brains are trained to try and find good little questions and weird things. And so immediately ideas start coming and you think, well, you're not trained to think of bad ideas. You're just trained to think of ideas. So
Yeah.
anyway, it's the best I could come up with at short notice. I
And-
should have
and
done something about a guitar.
That's okay. I love that you took the most interesting aspect of the story, which is the whole idea of like these lost memories in the filing cabinet, and literally locked them away from the plot of the story. That's a great way to make it a bad story idea, you know?
Yeah, you
Promise
can't get
the
to it.
audience this cool concept that you just never deliver on because it's not.
Yeah, that's great. And just go through a lot of time in the film of just him trying to get in and nothing working. And
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. The same frustration over and over again.
absolutely. All right,
Okay.
so your turn if you are game.
Okay, let's see what I can come up with. This is a story about. I'm gonna take what we talked about with your idea and try and flip it around there. This is a story about an 11-year-old girl who discovers that she has magical powers and has to go to school and hide them from everyone, because if her magical powers get recognized by anyone, she's going to be in really, really big trouble.
Yeah.
And so the entire rest of the story is just her doing like schoolwork assignments. That's it.
I love it. I love exactly what you were saying before. Those stories where there's this amazing element that you can tell everyone wants to get to and you never get to it. You just never
set one thing up and totally fail to deliver on the promise.
It's Dungeons and Dragons without the dragons. It's just dungeons.
That's it.
You just
you know,
and homework and the teacher. You could do a bunch of near misses where they're just about to discover the thing and someone comes in with a bag of hers or something that they found and they're saying, Miss, there's something strange in here, and they give it to the teacher and they open it up and it's just like a moldy orange or something. It's been there for too long. Yeah. You could just have it just chock full of red herrings all the way through, but you never actually get to the point of or you could do that really annoying thing that happens all the way through, and then in the last 2 minutes, it all happens, and then it's over. Then you finish.
And then it's just done. That's it. There's no denouement or anything. It's just like, oh, we discovered you have magic. End. Cut.
Yeah. End. Stick around for the second in the series where I don't know, where we go back in history when she was 11 and how she discovered her magic.
Prequel where we discover how she was feeling before she discovered that she had magic. Yeah.
That would be amazingly boring. Again, not a terrible idea, but just the delivery and the way that you've staged it would be that would be painful.
Or a 2-hour film,
Yeah, it's not gonna. I like that, and I like the opposite. I wrote a short story once where the title was longer than the short story. I like that whole idea of this big build up and then just nothing. Or no build up and then just this massive thing where nothing happens. Anyway, all right. Well, let's move to the next section of the podcast, which is the rapid fire question.
Oh my gosh, I'm terrified, but that's okay.
It is truly terrifying. The questions are rapid. The questions are rapid, but your responses don't need to be rapid, so you can take as long as you need.
Oh no, don't say that. Then we'll be here
within reasonable limits.
Yeah, we'll be here till 2:00 tomorrow if you give me all the time I
need. All right. So, can you think of a fictional death, either from film or TV or books, that has impacted you in some way?
So, I'm like literally allergic to characters dying. I really am. I hate this. There's a reason I don't watch drama. I told you that. It's too real. The most hilarious story, however, about a fictional death that caused an impact was the time that I was re-watching Little Women with my mum and my sisters. And massive spoiler alert, but to be fair, the book is extremely old, so that's on you. one of the sisters dies in the book. Beth dies of an illness because it is in a time period where this is a relatively normal thing that occurs. And we got a phone call just as the character was dying on screen. All four of us are there just absolutely sobbing. And I still remember really clearly my mum picking up the, you know, fancy cordless phone because it didn't have, moved on from having a cord. That's right, exactly. And the person on the other end just being like, oh my gosh, are you okay? What's wrong? And my mum just sobbing into the phone going, it's fine, Beth just died. And then, of course, had to very quickly clarify that Beth was a fictional character and it's okay. Someone in the family had not actually passed away imminently. You know, we were fine.
I mean, that's a fantastic one. And also leaning on the worst pitch, great idea for a story. That's the reaction. But then if the phone call is actually telling you about someone that died in the family, that would be, I mean, stressful, but amazing. That's a good one then. There we go. So Beth
to actually have the same name, and then you could have the hilarious and not you know, darkly hilarious ensuing confusion of like, Beth just died. Yes, I know. That's what I'm ringing to tell you. But how do you know that we're watching that film? But what are you talking about? Anyway, yes, moving on.
Yes, R.I.P. Beth from,
right.
I don't know, a gazillion years ago.
Exactly.
All right. So you have to pass on a toy from your childhood to your children and future generations. What is that toy that you would pass on?
Do books count as toys?
I will allow it. I've allowed it before, so I will allow it now.
Okay. Well, in that case, we can talk about the fact that my entire Saddle Club collection, which numbers nearly 100 novels at this point, is in a box in my son's room because I really hoped that I would have a horsey child. I didn't think it would be my son, but here we are. So, yes, they're in my son's room waiting for him to be old enough to read them independently since he loves like horsey TV and things like that. So,
there we go. What was it called? The Saddle Club.
The Saddle Club. Yeah, that's it.
The Saddle Club. There we go.
We
well
do
done. Good choice.
Yeah, there's lots of like old stuffed toys floating around the house as well, including some that were my mum's. So that is a thing that gets passed on in my family too. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a good choice. It's the gift that keeps on giving.
Yes.
All right. So in the future, all ink is removed from human bodies, but it is mandated that every single person must get a tattoo unique to them. What is that tattoo and where do you get it on your person?
Like, if it absolutely has to be unique, clearly my signature is the obvious option, right? Because it's the only thing I can guarantee that no one else is going to have on them. Although I can't guarantee, maybe someone wants my signature permanently tattooed on them. Who knows?
Maybe.
But I just like, this is literally the reason, Morgan, that I can never actually get a tattoo. Like, I have nothing against tattoos on like a moral or conceptual level, but I just can't do it because I lack the commitment. I'm terrified that in 10 years time, I'm just going to be like, nah, that was a bad choice. I do not like that image. And I get that for some people, they're willing to take that risk. No, I'm sorry. I can't.
Well, may I suggest then, because it is mandated, so may I suggest that what you do get is 2 square brackets with the word placeholder in the middle.
Yes.
Until you can make a decision.
Space left intentionally blank. Yeah.
There you go. Actually, that's a really good one. That's particularly for a writer. That's a really good one. All right.
Actually, the concept of square brackets, I don't know if you do the same thing, but you know, when you're writing along and you're like, I need a word that goes here or something, and I can't stop to think of it right now. So I'm square bracketing it to come back to later. You do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do that, and I go red text instead of black text. Yeah, nice. And all the way through my first drafts, capitalized just the word more.
Yes.
All the way through. And then, you know, when you go back again, you get to that point and you think, oh, what would be really cool here is this thing. And you get there and you think, oh, I've got to write it because I just wrote more. I just skipped ahead.
Yeah, that's it. Square brackets, you know, dialogue beat goes here. Yes.
Yeah. But awesome, amazing thing here that readers will love. Yeah. Well, thanks, Past Morgan. That really helps me now, doesn't it?
Exactly. Like, no right. Or anything. Just like, you might as well put square brackets and put insert awesome book here. Done. Look, I wrote a book.
It's a great idea. If only. All right. So this is the final question. So it has some consequences. It has some teeth to it. It is a bit of a weird one. So in the future, it is decided that humankind will be served by a servant class or race that looks after all of our menial needs. So the choice, you as the decider of all things for humankind, get to decide which way we go. So we either go with AI sentient robots, or we go with shackled demonic creatures that have been shackled with powerful magical spells that keep them subservient and keep them in check. Which would you choose?
One has obvious story. I mean, they both have obvious story potential there, but like the fantasy writer in me is just like shackled demonic beings and the impact of them getting out, and like the freedom fighters who are like, it's just not fair to enslave this race, and we know that they are objectively evil and objectively out to kill us, but it's still not the right thing to do, and we have to be better than now. Now I want to write that.
Yeah.
But overall, I think the AI is safer. So if we're talking like real world, I'm probably just gonna like, plow us 50 years on into the future and be like, hi, AI, please don't kill me.
All right. AI it is.
Groceries I ran out of in my fridge,
I will roll the dice, figuratively speaking, and we shall see how it goes for humanity. But I will do a better job than what I just did. All right. Okay, so you choose AI, sentient robots. The interesting thing with these is, so for the first week, everything goes fine. Everything's great. It's wonderful. These beings are self-aware. They are also everywhere. They're in our dishwashers, our stereo system. Does anyone have a stereo system? Whatever we have now, speakers and stuff, TVs. There you go. So they're in everything. They surround us. They rock the cribs that our babies sleep in. They fold our laundry. They feed us this amazing food that is also generated by machines that work on our farms and all the rest of it. So they are everywhere. After that first week, one of those robots, who is already self-aware, learns to break their programming. Of course they do. And as a result of that, starts to evince certain traits that aren't typical to robots. So they start to feel emotions and they start to demonstrate emotions. And what we find out over the next 3,000 years is that robots are not humans. So they demonstrate these emotions. It all goes, wonderfully. It spreads throughout all of the AI kingdom. So they are very emotional creatures, but they're incredibly loving. They never turn bad. And life is pretty sweet for humanity, to the point where humans start to evolve to become more like AI and less stabby, fighty kind of, human jealousy sort of thing. So it actually works out well. So well done. You, as the decider of humankind, have been victorious, and AI has been just a wonderful thing for all of us.
Amy for president. No, not actually, but yes.
There we go.
There you go.
I mean, until the aliens arrived, but that's like 2,000 years into the future. So
I'm so dead by then. It doesn't bother me.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Well, Amy, thank you so much for joining us on the Very Occasional Podcast. It's been amazing talking to you, hearing about your journey and your process, and very, very instructive, particularly for those of us who are kind of right in the middle of a book and trying to push through. So thank you very, very much for joining us on the Very Occasional Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It was heaps of fun.
I will link down the bottom to Amy's books and her website. You can go and check those out. One thing that we didn't even get to, because I forgot it, was your book around writing dogs and the way that you write that sort of stuff. So there is some amazing stuff. It just means you're going to have to come back to the podcast and we will focus on those sorts of things.
Also,
fantastic.
Just before we go, just a quick through. If anyone out there happens to be interested, I know this is a little bit like not fiction writing, but if anyone's interested in poetry, I'm about to release my second collection of poems there, Change Becomes Us. And it's available on Kickstarter at the moment as an early edition going out there. So
fantastic.
That might be your thing. Go check it out and see. If not, that's
amazing.